In a game packed with loud personalities and big egos, he was the complete opposite. Just 22 years old, no media buzz, and zero interest in fame. But when the pressure hit its peak, he pulled off one of the most legendary performances poker had ever seen. So, how did this quiet, unassuming math nerd conquer the biggest stage in poker?
This is the moment 22-year-old Peter Eastgate steps into poker history.
This is the story of the 22-year-old who didn't want fame, but still outscored everyone. Born in 1985 in Odense, Denmark, Peter Eastgate was just a regular kid growing up in a quiet suburb called Dalum. But then came the poker boom in the early 2000s, and suddenly, everything changed. Denmark caught the poker fever, and the corridors of St. Knud's Gymnasium buzzed with conversations about the game. That's where Peter first got hooked, thanks to his classmates. What started as friendly home games quickly became something much bigger. Peter, a math lover with a thing for psychology, found poker endlessly fascinating. It wasn't just luck and cards, it was mind games, numbers, and reading people. He started learning the game bit by bit, sharpening his skills while still hitting the books. After high school, he enrolled at Aarhus University to study finance. But the balance didn't last long. See, Peter had already made his first online poker deposit and had even broken even that first year. No small feat for a beginner. As the wins slowly began piling up, it became clear that school and poker weren't going to mix. In his own words, his time in university mostly consisted of surviving on one pizza a day, hiding in his dorm, and dodging responsibilities. The internet was terrible, the motivation was worse, and poker was calling louder than any lecture could. Eventually, he packed up and moved back to Odense, got himself a proper setup, and dove into poker full-time. In 2005, at just 20 years old, he dropped out of college and officially turned pro. He focused hard on shorthanded and heads-up high-limit online cash games. $200 per $400 stakes. The real deal. Before long, he'd built up a reputation as one of Denmark's strongest internet players, even racking up a bankroll of $200,000. By 2007, Peter wasn't just playing, he was teaching. He tried to coach his younger brother, and together they threw $2,000 into a Ladbrokes account, dreaming of turning it into something big. But after one brutal Friday night session where they lost half the money, his brother bailed. Peter didn't. Fueled by frustration, he kept grinding, still using that same account. It was technically against the rules, but he stood by it. He was doing all the work, making all the plays, and back then, a lot of pros were operating with similar gray area tactics. That weekend turned into an absolute heater. Peter started crushing games, moving up in stakes, and grinding like crazy. He even landed himself on a poker leaderboard that scored him a free cruise and a WSOP package. But after losing half his bankroll that year, he made a tough call. He sold the WSOP package for cash instead of the heading to Vegas. Still, he had a strong year on the live circuit, making the final table at the Irish Open and cashing in a bunch of European Poker Tour events, including one right in his backyard at EPT Copenhagen. All that momentum was building towards something huge. In 2008, Peter set out to compete on poker's biggest stage, the World Series of Poker main event. He signed up through Ladbrokes Poker and headed to Vegas as part of Team Ladbrokes. Now, the 2008 main event? That was a war zone. Thousands of players flooded into Las Vegas, all in pursuit of the same dream. A staggering $9.1 million top prize. The pressure was insane, the competition brutal, and after days of grinding through the madness, only 9 players were left standing. The now iconic November 9. Among them stood Peter. He entered the final table in 4th place with 19.7 million chips, trailing behind big names like Dennis Phillips, Ivan Demidov, and Scott Montgomery. This wasn't just a game anymore. It was a made-for-TV moment. The WSOP took a bold step that year and paused the tournament for a few months before the final table, building hype like never before. When the final table resumed, everyone had eyes on Kelly Kim as the likely first elimination due to his short stack, but poker had other plans. Instead, Craig Marquis was the first to bust, losing in brutal fashion after flopping a set of sevens, only to get cracked by a runner-runner straight. Kim followed soon after, and then came the fall of David Chino Ream. Despite getting it in good with Ace-King against Eastgate's Ace-Queen, the flop crushed his hopes, and he was out in 7th place with a $1.77 million consolation. Dara Suharto was next, exiting in sixth. Then came a heartbreaker for Scott Montgomery. After losing a major pre-flop hand to Demidov, Montgomery was all in with ace-3 against Eastgate's pocket sixes. The flop and turn looked promising, giving him top pair with an ace, but the river was a gut punch. A 6 that gave Eastgate a full house. Montgomery walked away with just over $3 million. Ilon Schwartz took fourth, and then it was down to 3. That's when Phillips met his end, pushing back at Eastgate's aggression with a semi-bluff on a Jack-4-3 flop. But Eastgate was sitting on a set of threes and instantly called. By the turn, Phillips was drawing dead and ultimately took third place, earning $4.5 million. That left just 2 players standing, Peter Eastgate with nearly 80 million chips and Ivan Demidov with 57.7 million. The young Dane versus the fearless Russian. This was the clash everyone had been waiting for. The heads-up match was intense, a true tug of war. Early on, Eastgate took control with a strong call against a Demidov river bluff. He crossed the 100 million chip mark while Demidov was left scrambling. But Demidov wasn't done. He fought back, climbing to over 50 million and putting serious pressure on Eastgate with bold re-raises. Still, Eastgate held his ground and delivered a massive blow by catching Demidov bluffing once again, this time with a flush that pulled in a jaw-dropping 44 million chip pot. Demidov's stack continued to dwindle. After another break, the blinds were brutal, 500,000 to 1 million, and he was down to just over 16 million. That's when the final hand played out. On a king-high flop, Eastgate kept the pressure on. Demidov check-raised all in after the turn, trying to turn the tide one last time. But Eastgate had made a wheel straight with ace-5 and wasn't going anywhere. He snap-called, and when the river hit, Demidov's 2-pair wasn't enough. It was all over.
Peter Eastgate, congratulations. You are the 2008 World Champion of Poker, and this bracelet is yours.
That final table broke records. Over 15.5 hours of high-stakes poker stretched across nearly 3 days. And when the dust settled, Peter Eastgate stood alone.
22-year-old Peter Eastgate steps into poker history.
At only 22, he became the youngest champion in WSOP main event history, breaking Phil Hellmuth's long-held record. He walked away with $9.1 million and the legendary Golden Diamond WSOP bracelet, securing his place in poker history. The poker world was in shock. Eastgate had achieved the ultimate dream, winning it all on his very first deep run. People figured he was on the fast track to poker superstardom. I mean, the money, the fame, the big sponsorship deals, it was all right there, waiting for him. But here's the twist. The young Dane never really got comfortable in that spotlight. You see, after Peter's jaw-dropping win at the 2008 World Series of Poker, he quickly became a regular fixture on the international poker circuit, and it didn't take long before PokerStars signed him to a high-profile sponsorship deal. That meant he was now representing the online giant at major tournaments around the globe. In early 2009, Eastgate hit the ground running at the PokerStars Caribbean Adventure, cashing in 2 events and even winning one for a cool $343,000, but his real showstopper came a few months later at the EPT London main event. There, he battled his way to a remarkable second-place finish, walking away with over £500,000, roughly $843,000. He even made another deep run in the WSOP that same year, finishing 78th, which was one of the strongest main event title defenses of the decade. Then came 2010, and although Eastgate secured another strong result with a 5th-place finish at the NBC National Heads Up Championship, things were beginning to change behind the scenes. The pressure, the travel, the expectations, it all started taking a toll. That summer, when the WSOP kicked off, Eastgate was nowhere to be found. Instead of grinding it out in Vegas, he was in South Africa, soaking up the excitement of the World Cup with fellow pro JC Alvarado, and then came the shocker. On July 6, 2010, Eastgate made a public announcement that he was stepping away from the game. He explained that when he turned pro, his main goal had been to become financially independent. And after winning the main event, he had achieved that. The hunger that once fueled his rise just wasn't there anymore. In a candid blog post, Eastgate opened up about his loss of motivation and his desire to rediscover what he really wanted from life. He wasn't just stepping back from poker, he was pressing pause on everything to figure out who Peter Eastgate was beyond the felt. But behind that decision was something even more personal. Around late 2009, Eastgate had fallen deep into the world of sports betting. What started as a weekend hobby quickly spiraled into something much darker. Over about 8 or 9 months, he lost between $500,000 and $700,000. Then came the 2010 World Cup. He set a stop-loss limit at $500,000, but by the time the quarterfinals rolled around, he had already dropped $1.2 million. And just when it couldn't get worse, he bet another $500,000 that Spain wouldn't win. And of course, they did. It was a breaking point. Emotionally drained and financially battered, Eastgate decided not to return to Vegas. Even with a sponsorship deal that would have let him play for free, he chose to walk away. He later admitted he'd become a degenerate gambler, with his mood constantly yo-yoing based on how he was running, whether in poker or sports betting. Something had to change. So Peter Eastgate pulled the plug. He quit the games, the lifestyle, the fame, all of it. And then he did something that truly stunned the poker community. In November 2010, he put his WSOP main event bracelet up for auction on eBay, not out of desperation, but for charity. All proceeds went to UNICEF. The bracelet, made of 18-karat white gold and encrusted with 291 diamonds, fetched an impressive $147,500. While some fans saw it as a generous and noble gesture, others thought it was a slap in the face to poker. Poker legend Tony G even joked about buying it and turning it into a dog collar. But Eastgate stood firm. To him, the bracelet was just a trophy sitting in a drawer. He had no emotional attachment to it, and if he could turn it into something that helped others, why not? Even though he stepped away, Peter never fully closed the door on poker. In early 2011, he announced he'd be playing the EPT Copenhagen and the NBC Heads Up Championship, both sponsored by PokerStars. He was clear, though, this wasn't a comeback, just a few tournaments he felt like playing. PokerStars had supported him through his break, and now he was returning the favor. In 2012, he made a strong showing at the WSOP 1,500 No Limit Hold'em event, finishing fourth for over $209,000. He even joined Team Betfair Poker later that year. But by 2013, his tournament trail had mostly gone cold. His last recorded cash came that year at the ISPT London, where he won just under $4,000. As of 2014, his total live tournament earnings had crossed $11.2 million. In 2015, he surprised fans by registering for the WSOP main event again. Not as a serious return, but just for fun while vacationing in Vegas. By then, it was clear that poker was no longer the center of his world. Eastgate has since admitted he no longer believes he could keep up with today's hyper-aggressive online game. He's joked that if he had been born 10 years later, he probably wouldn't have even made it as a pro. Instead, he's explored other careers, engineering, teaching, though none stuck. These days, Eastgate lives a simple life back in Denmark. He told ESPN that extravagant living was never his thing. His expenses are low, his lifestyle modest, and he's perfectly content. As he put it, his life now feels like one long, peaceful Sunday, and he wouldn't have it any other way. Tens of thousands of poker players around the world dream of living the kind of life Peter Eastgate once had. Think about it. Millions in winnings, big-name sponsorships, and the kind of freedom most people can only imagine, traveling the globe and making a living from the game they love. On the surface, it looked like Eastgate had hit the jackpot, both literally and figuratively. But behind all the flashing lights and final tables, his story had a quieter, more complicated layer. Sure, he could have stuck around, maybe snagged a few more titles, stacked that bankroll even higher. But at what cost? The non-stop grind, the pressure to keep performing, the mental wear and tear, it's not for everyone. And Eastgate? He knew that. This wasn't some crash and burn story, it was a thoughtful decision. He stepped away not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He chose peace of mind over poker fame, and honestly, when you hear him talk about it, it sounds like he made the right decision for himself.